If you trace your finger along the spine of South America, moving north past the Amazon and past the great rivers, you will reach the shoulder of the continent. There, sandwiched between Venezuela, Suriname, and the churning Atlantic Ocean, lies the cooperative Republic of Guyana. It is a land defined by water and wood. It is a place where the earth breathes, where the humidity hangs in the air like a physical weight, and where the jungle is not merely a landscape, but a living, aggressive entity. In the northwestern district of this country, the rainforest is a green cathedral. It is vast, ancient, and indifferent to human suffering. It is a place of silence, but not of peace. The silence here is heavy. It is a silence that swallows sound, swallows light, and eventually swallows history. In the mid-1970s, nearly 1,000 Americans left everything they knew to come to this green cathedral. They sold their homes in California. They said goodbye to their families. They gave up their possessions, their savings, and their autonomy. They boarded planes and boats to travel to a place that did not appear on most maps. They came here to build a utopia. They came to build a promised land, free from the racism, the capitalism, and the nuclear paranoia that defined the United States during the Cold War. They called their settlement the People's Temple Agricultural Project. The world would come to know it simply as Jonestown. When we think of Jonestown today, we think of the end. We think of the bodies. We think of the horror. But to truly understand the tragedy of November 18, 1978, we must first understand the terrifying geography of the place itself. This jungle was the first wall of their prison. Imagine arriving here. You are a city dweller from San Francisco or Los Angeles. You are used to concrete, electricity, and the noise of traffic. Suddenly, you are dropped into a prehistoric world. The heat is oppressive, rising to 100 degrees with 90% humidity. The insects are relentless. The mud is knee-deep. There are no roads out of Jonestown. The only way in or out is by boat, navigating the murky waters of the Kaituma River. A journey that takes hours. And the boat belongs to the leader. This isolation was not an accident. It was a deliberate architectural choice. The leader, Jim Jones, chose this location specifically because it was a cage without bars. In San Francisco, his followers had jobs, families, and connections to the outside world. Here, they had only him. Here, the reality of the world was whatever Jim Jones said it was. If he said the United States had fallen into fascism, there was no news anchor to contradict him. If he said the Ku Klux Klan was marching in the streets, there was no newspaper to prove him wrong. The jungle acted as a sensory deprivation tank, stripping away the old reality and replacing it with a new, terrifying truth constructed by one man. As we drift over this endless canopy, looking down at the impenetrable roof of the rainforest, we are looking at the ultimate weapon of control. It wasn't the guns, and it wasn't the barbed wire. It was the geography. The people who came here were trapped by the very landscape they sought to tame. They were thousands of miles from help. Hidden under this canopy, invisible to the world. They had stepped off the edge of the map. And in the silence of this jungle, a nightmare was being carefully, methodically engineered. They did not come here to die. They came here to live. And that is the most heartbreaking truth of all. To understand the end, we must understand the beginning. Why did they leave? What force is strong enough to compel a grandmother to leave her church in Indiana, or a law student to leave Berkeley, to hack out a clearing in the Amazon? The answer lies in the atmosphere of the 1970s. The United States was a nation in convulsion. The idealism of the 1960s had soared. The Vietnam War had ended in a chaotic withdrawal. The Watergate scandal had shattered faith in the government. Racial tension was boiling over in the cities. For many, it felt as if the American experiment was failing. Into this void stepped Jim Jones. He was not just a preacher, he was a mirror. He reflected the anxieties of his flock back at them, but he offered a solution. To the elderly African American women who made up the backbone of his congregation, he offered a society free of Jim Crow, free of poverty, and free of loneliness. To the young white radicals, he offered true socialism, a community where all things were held in common. He called it apostolic socialism. He performed miracles, faked, of course, pulling cancers out of bodies and predicting the future. But the greatest miracle he performed was the creation of a family. He gave the unwanted and the unheard a voice. He told them they were special. He told them they were the chosen. But by 1977, the walls were closing in on Jones. Investigative reporters were asking questions about financial fraud, physical abuse, and the custody of children. Jones, paranoid and drug-addicted, triggered the exodus. He told his followers that the fascists were coming to destroy them. He told them that the only way to save their rainbow family was to flee to the promised land. The migration to Guyana was sudden and chaotic. People left in the middle of the night. They packed what they could carry and boarded planes for South America. When they arrived, they didn't find the paradise they were promised. They found a work camp. The soil in Jonestown was poor, acidic, and unsuited for agriculture. The crops failed. The food was scarce, mostly rice and watery gravy. The dormitories were overcrowded, filled with the smell of unwashed bodies and mildew. Privacy was non-existent. Married couples were separated. Children were raised communally, often kept apart from their parents to break the bourgeois bond of the nuclear family. But even amidst the hardship, the dream persisted. We have letters from this time, written by residents to their families back home. They speak of the beauty of the jungle, the joy of living without money, the peace of being away from the violence of American cities. They were trying to make it work. They were investing their sweat and blood into this soil because they had burned their bridges. There was no going back. To admit that Jonestown was a failure would be to admit that their entire lives had been a lie. And so, they worked. They sang. And they waited for the paradise that was always just around the corner, promised by the man who watched them from his throne. In the jungle, silence is a luxury. In Jonestown, silence was forbidden. The voice of Jim Jones was omnipresent. It blared from loudspeakers mounted on wooden towers throughout the settlement. It echoed through the fields where the people worked. It drifted into the cottages where they tried to sleep. It played 24 hours a day, a relentless sonic bombardment that allowed for no mental escape. Jones sat in his radio room at the center of the compound, often high on a cocktail of amphetamines and painkillers, rambling into the microphone. He would talk for hours without stopping. He read the news, or rather, his twisted version of the news. He read passages from the Bible only to mock them. He delivered long, paranoid monologues about the enemies encircling the camp. This technique is known as psychic driving. It is a method of brainwashing that relies on repetition and sensory overload to break down the subject's ability to think critically. Imagine living in this sonic prison. You have no radio to tune into a different station. You have no television. You have no newspapers. Your only connection to reality is this rusted speaker on the pole. Through this speaker, Jones constructed a siege mentality. He told his followers that the United States had descended into chaos. He told them that African Americans were being herded into concentration camps. He told them that the CIA was hiding in the trees, waiting to invade. He convinced 900 people that the world outside was a burning house, and that Jonestown, despite its hardships, was the only fire escape. But the voice did more than just lie. It tested, it demanded, and it terrified. This brings us to the White Nights. These were the rehearsals for the apocalypse. In the middle of the night, the siren would wail, a mechanical scream cutting through the jungle noise. The exhausted residents, dragged from their sleep, would have to run to the central pavilion. Guards armed with crossbows and rifles would surround them. Jones would take the microphone, his voice booming through these speakers, telling them that the attack was imminent. He would present them with a choice: surrender to the mercenaries and be tortured, or commit revolutionary suicide and die with dignity. He would pass around cups of red liquid. He would tell them it was poison. He would watch as mothers gave it to their children. He would watch as they wept, said their goodbyes, and drank. And then, nothing. He would laugh. He would tell them it was just a loyalty test. He would tell them they had passed. Think of the psychological toll of this ritual. How many times can you line up to die before death loses its meaning? How many times can you say goodbye to your life before you stop hoping for a future? The White Knights broke their will to live. They normalized the act of dying. They turned suicide into a bureaucratic procedure, a vote of confidence in the leader. The speaker on the pole was the true ruler of Jonestown. It stripped away their agency, layer by layer, until the idea of drinking poison wasn't a frantic decision made in the moment, but a routine they had practiced a dozen times before. The horror wasn't just that they died. The horror was that they had been dying by inches for years. Commanded by the voice on the wire, the speaker told them what to think, what to feel, and eventually, when to end it all. November 14, 1978, the bubble bursts. The isolation is breached. Congressman Leo Ryan, a charismatic and ambitious politician from California, arrives in Guyana. He is accompanied by a delegation of journalists from NBC and concerned relatives of the temple members. They have heard the rumors. They have heard the stories of beatings, of forced labor, of a prison camp disguised as a paradise. They are here to find the truth. Jim Jones tried to stop them. He tried to block their entry. But eventually, trapped by the scrutiny of the media, he had to let the mask slip. He allowed them into the compound. For one evening, Jonestown put on a show. There was music. There was a band. The residents sang songs about the beauty of socialism. They danced. To the untrained eye, it looked like the utopia Jones had promised. The reporters interviewed members who smiled and said they were happy, that they never wanted to leave. But the cracks were visible to those who looked closely. The reporters saw the fear in the eyes of the elderly. They saw the way men stood with their arms crossed, watching every interaction. And then the dam broke. During the festivities, a note was surreptitiously pressed into the hand of NBC reporter Don Harris. It was written on a crumpled piece of paper, the handwriting shaky. It read, simply, "Help us get out of Jonestown." That tiny scrap of paper was the death warrant for 918 people. It proved that the cage was real. It proved that the loyalty was coerced. It proved that beneath the singing and the applause, there were people desperate to escape. When Leo Ryan announced the next day that anyone who wished to leave could come with him, the illusion of the unified family shattered. Jones watched as a small group, only a dozen or so, stepped forward. Families were torn apart. A wife chose to leave while her husband stayed. A young man chose to go while his parents remained. For Jim Jones, a narcissist in the final stages of drug-induced paranoia and physical decline, This was the ultimate betrayal. It wasn't about the numbers, it was about the defiance. If one person left, the narrative of the perfect utopia was destroyed. He could not allow the world to know the truth. The delegation took the defectors to this airstrip, Port Kaituma, a few miles from the compound. They were boarding the planes, believing they had escaped the heart of darkness. They were wrong. A trailer from the commune, pulled onto the runway. Men leaped out. Men who had once been gentle fathers and sons, now turned into executioners by years of conditioning. They opened fire. Congressman Leo Ryan was gunned down on the tarmac. 3 journalists died in the red mud. This moment, right here on this airstrip, was the point of no return. Jones knew the United States government would not ignore the assassination of a congressman. The siege he had fantasized about, the apocalypse he had preached, was now real. He had conjured the demon. And now, he had to feed it. The bloodshed on this runway sealed the fate of everyone back in the jungle. The time for rehearsals was over. There is a tape. It is catalogued by the FBI as Q042. It is 44 minutes of audio recorded on a reel-to-reel machine during the final hour of Jonestown. It is, perhaps, the most terrifying document in human history. On the tape, you do not hear a chaotic riot. You do not hear a massacre in the traditional sense. You hear an organized, bureaucratic argument for death. Jones gathers his flock in the pavilion. The mood is somber, confused, and terrified. He tells them that the congressman is dead. He tells them that the parachute troops are on their way. He tells them that the enemy will parachute in and torture their children, castrate the men, and enslave the women. He tells them that their dream is over. Death is 1,000,000 times preferable to 10 more days of this life, he says. His voice is slurred, tired, but commanding. He frames death not as a tragedy, but as an act of political defiance. He calls it revolutionary suicide. There is dissent. A woman named Christine Miller stands up. She is brave. She argues with the prophet. She asks, is it too late for Russia? Can we not airlift to Russia? She pleads for life. She says, as long as there is life, there is hope. She is the voice of reason in a room of madness. But the crowd, conditioned by years of obedience, shouts her down. They are too tired to fight. They are too afraid to hope. And then, the chemistry of death begins. Dr. Lawrence Schacht, the camp's physician, a man sworn to save lives, had prepared the mixture. It was a bucket of grape flavor, aid, laced with Valium, chloral hydrate, and cyanide. It was a cocktail designed to shut down the body in minutes. They brought the babies up first. This is the detail that breaks the soul. This is the detail that removes this event from the realm of suicide and places it firmly in the realm of mass murder. The infants and the toddlers could not choose to die. They could not understand the politics of revolutionary suicide. They were held in the arms of their mothers. The nurses used plastic syringes to squirt the purple poison into the backs of their throats. On the tape, the background noise shifts. It changes from the murmuring of a crowd to a chorus of screaming children and wailing mothers. It is a sound of pure, unadulterated pain. Cyanide is not a peaceful death. It deprives the cells of oxygen. It causes convulsions, foaming at the mouth, and terror. It is a suffocation of the blood. Jones speaks over the screaming. Stop this hysterics, he commands. D with some dignity. Lay down your life with dignity. Don't die with tears and agony. He sounds annoyed, like a parent scolding noisy children, while hundreds of people die at his feet. This image of the vat represents the ultimate betrayal. A doctor used his knowledge to kill. A pastor used his scripture to condemn. Parents used their hands to poison their children. It was the total inversion of the natural order. The purple liquid in this drum was the physical manifestation of Jones's toxicity. He viewed these people not as humans, but as extensions of his own ego. If he was going to die, they had to die. If he couldn't be the king of the world, he would be the king of the graveyard. Within 45 minutes, the screaming stopped. The silence returned to the jungle. 918 lives extinguished. Jones was found with a bullet wound to the head, likely self-inflicted, or perhaps requested of a guard. He didn't drink the poison. He took the quick way out, leaving his followers to writhe in the dirt. When the Guyanese troops arrived the next morning, they thought they were looking at a pile of colorful laundry. From a distance, the bright reds, blues, and greens of the clothing looked like a quilt laid out over the ground. But as they got closer, the horror revealed itself. The victims were lying face down. They were arm in arm. Families had huddled together in death as they had in life. Husbands held wives. Mothers curled around children. The body count kept rising. First, the reports said 400, then 500, then 700. They discovered that bodies had been stacked on top of bodies. The final tally was 918 souls. 304 of them were minors. The cleanup was a nightmare of logistics. The heat of the jungle accelerates decomposition. The American military had to drop body bags from helicopters. The smell was something that the soldiers who were there say they can never scrub from their memories. It was the smell of the end of the world. But beyond the physical horror, there was the cultural impact. Jonestown punched a hole in the American psyche. It ended the innocence of the 1970s. It made us afraid of faith. It made us afraid of community. It made us terrified of the charismatic leader. It gave us the phrase, "Drink the Kool-Aid." We use it casually now. We use it to describe blind loyalty to a corporate strategy, a sports team, or a political candidate. But that phrase is a linguistic scar. It is a trivialization of a massacre. Every time we say it, we are forgetting the mothers who were forced to hold their dying babies. We are forgetting the armed guards who stood at the perimeter with crossbows and rifles, blocking the exits. We are forgetting that for many in Jonestown, this was not suicide. It was murder. The autopsy reports showed injection marks on the backs of many victims, places they couldn't reach themselves. They were held down. They were forced. The narrative that they all walked willingly into the dark is a final victory for Jim Jones's propaganda. He wanted the world to see a unified act of defiance. The truth was a chaotic, terrified slaughter. Today, there is almost nothing left of Jonestown. The Guyanese government allowed the jungle to take it back. The cottages were dismantled or rotted away. The pavilion burned down. The earth has digested the poison. If you go there now, you will find only vines and silence. The insects buzz, the birds call, and the rain falls, indifferent to the history in the soil. But Jonestown is not just a place on a map that has vanished. It is a place in the human mind. It is a reminder of the terrifying fragility of our own psychology. We like to believe that we are immune to this kind of control. We like to believe that we are too smart, too independent, too cynical to fall for a Jim Jones. But Jones didn't start with the poison. He started with the promise. He started with the desire for a better world. He started with the human need to belong. He started with the words that everyone wants to hear. You are loved, you are worthy, and you are safe with me. The tragedy of Jonestown is not that they were monsters. It is that they were human. They were looking for heaven, and they followed a map that led them straight into hell. We tell this story not to gawk at the dead, but to warn the living. The mechanisms of control that Jim Jones used: isolation, fear, information control, and the weaponization of loyalty are not extinct. They exist in abusive relationships, in extremist groups, and in the darker corners of the internet. The jungle has covered the scars, but the warning remains. As long as there are people who feel lost, as long as there are people who feel afraid, there will always be a voice on the wire, waiting to tell them exactly what they want to hear. And in the silence of the night, that is the most terrifying sound of all.